All right, good evening all, and welcome to the Tunnel Road Corridor Study Community Meeting. This is being held via Zoom on April 14th, 2021. We are currently recording this community meeting, so I just want to make sure that all folks are aware. If you do have questions, please type them into the chats and we'll have our fantastic team that we're about to introduce answer those as they come across their screen. So if just to be cognizant of everybody's time and everything, just make sure that folks are muted so that it doesn't disrupt, and we will go ahead and get started. Um, so we are about to uh, get this presentation. We're going to turn it off first to Tristan Winkler, who is the director of the French Broad River NPO.
Hey folks, I'm Tristan Winkler. I'm the director of the French Broad River MPO, and sorry, I've got a 1-year-old who's ready for dinner. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We are joined by City of Asheville staff. We have staff from the planning department as well as the transportation department. We have our consultant team for this project, which is headed up by Kittleson and Associates. And also traffic planning and design, as well as Urban 3 and Pleasant Transportation Planning and Design. You'll hear more from them in a bit. Also, John Rideout, he's a transportation planner with the MPO, and he has been managing this project. So first of all, we just wanted to talk briefly about what is a corridor study. This is a new program at the MPO as well as generally for the region. So at the MPO, a lot of what we do is we work with our local governments as well as NCDOT to help determine what are the transportation projects that need to be prioritized throughout the region. In those conversations, we don't always have the opportunity to get into as much detail and have the types of community conversations that we'd always like. So by having these corridor studies, what we're able to do is engage the community early on in the transportation planning process. So we can help to build or at least document more of the community's vision, help to figure out where more of the priority hotspots are along a corridor or a small area, and help determine how people are envisioning this area changing and how the transportation network can be best suited to enable the most positive change possible. And so we see this as a living, breathing document that we can use as transportation planners to help move this project forward in the process in whatever form or fashion is determined. But I think it's also something that can be a real tool for the public and our communities that we serve, so that there is a more fleshed out idea that is more clear to people about what the project is that's moving forward and what all it entails. And so that's my spiel. And with that, I will hand it off to John.
Okay, fantastic. We go to the next slide, please. So why Tunnel Road? So one of the mechanisms that we decided to select Tunnel Road for a potential corridor study was that this area was identified in a couple of different areas for potential improvements. One, it was identified for congestion mitigation improvement considerations. It has also come up through the SPOT process, which is a MPO related kind of data oriented method for prioritizing future projects and incorporating them into the tip. We've also had conversations with other community members that often Tunnel Road will come up as a hotspot. And so we want to further those conversations in a positive way because we know that this area is both a regional economic driver, is an employment center, and that looking to current development practices and attention of late, that this area is going to experience kind of a redevelopment in the near future. Um, so how did we get to here? So the corridor study program is kind of a partnership with the French Broad River MPO, Buncombe County, the city of Asheville, and we work in conjunction with our NCDOT partners. The corridor study program started last summer. There's actually 2 projects currently being studied by the MPO and a 3rd sister project being managed by the city of Asheville. What these corridor projects really do is this is doing the homework before we even start to consider any future potential actual project that would require funding or construction. So there's been a lot of kind of homework talk being done. We've had our consultants study the transportation network, analyzing plans, environmental constraints. We've walked the area with NCDOT partners, as well as met with a lot of interested neighborhood associations, landowners, business owners, managers at various establishments, and then listened to neighborhood communities members as well as nonprofit organization. So what's been happening is that we've been kind of in a deep dive into this very small couple of miles, not even a 2-mile stretch, kind of identifying the items. So on that, I am going to turn it over to our fantastic consultant team led by Yolanda. So please, Yolanda, take it away from here.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it and very much appreciate everybody that's tuning in. So we're going to spend some time hopefully getting quickly to the points with it. This has been a long and really interesting process, but we'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's happening on Tunnel Road today. We've used a lot of our data and many of the things that you've told us to develop some goals and come up with some transportation recommendations. And then we'd like to talk to you about how the MPO and the city and the county and NCDOT can move forward. And once that's done, you'll have an opportunity to give us your comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, as well as answer any questions that you have. So how is the road functioning today, and for whom is it functioning? So as we mentioned, Tunnel Road, we're really looking at the section on Tunnel Road between the Beaucatcher Tunnel and Swannanoa River Drive Road on South Tunnel Road for the purposes of the study. We look at things like what the land uses are today. So the map on the left shows all the red around Tunnel Road, and you can see it sort of highlighted next to that, and most of it is red because that's what stands for commercial. Not very many people are actually living on the corridor. In fact, according to the census that we drew these numbers from, only about 240 people live along the corridor. You can see the right of way for 240, I-240 there. But what is particularly striking, if you can see the area that's sort of outlined on the map nearby, is those few people are really working either downtown or the hospitals, basically nearby. And when you start to look at the commercial activity and how transportation relates to that, again, that area that's outlined in orange there are the jobs that are there. So there are 4,300 jobs, about a third of that, which is located downtown. So there are a lot of people working here, but about 85% of them are retail or hospitality, accommodation, food service jobs. And so about 50% of the workers that are working here are in the $1,250 a month or less income bracket. So this is an important location both for affordable goods and services as well as for jobs. We also see, according to census from 2017, I believe these numbers are, that there are areas north of the corridor where people are living, and they're high, low or no car households according to this. So the darker color indicates that people are 14 to 17% no access to a vehicle in the home. So they're counting on transit. and walking and biking to get around. The corridor itself has a transportation function. One of the ways that we look at roads is, you know, what do they need to do? And this road needs to do quite a lot. It's an alternative for State Route I-240. The northern part of the road has a higher, what we call functional classification in the system than South Tunnel Road, which is considered a minor arterial. And it's critical for Asheville transit, ART transit. There are many lines that traverse on the corridor, and people are counting on to get around the region on transit on this road. And of course, it's the, you know, really a major conveyor for people who need to get from place to place. And it's the only access for cycling because the road network isn't very well developed. And Christy Stout is going to be talking to that in more detail in a minute. We also look at the demand on the road in terms of average daily traffic and how many lanes there are to accommodate that traffic. And on a road like Tunnel Road, you know, getting access to business is an important part of its function as well. And so there's a certain dynamic that happens there. But essentially, the traffic numbers grow as you go south, and the road itself sort of is larger in the middle and is, you know, is able to accommodate left turns where, you know, as you get closer from the interchange to the I-240 and the South Tunnel Road location, traffic is the highest in the area. And I'm going to just show you what happens here. Can folks sort of see this?
Yes.
If you look up in the top corner here, it's telling you time of day, and it's showing the colors are changing from green where nobody is, and then it's starting, South Tunnel Road is showing that traffic speeds are getting lower because there's more congestion. It's turning red for a good part of the day. So there is some congestion, which I know many of you experience on South Tunnel Road, but by and large, Tunnel Road itself, north of South Tunnel Road is generally pretty free flowing, and sometimes the speeds get high there. So what I'd like to do at this point is turn this over to Christy, who's going to do a deeper dive into some of the transportation data that we saw and how it's affected some of the goals of our work. So Christy Stout from.
Thank you, Yolanda. And what I'm going to go through briefly is just to touch base on, in our initial review of this corridor, some of the issues we found and how they feed into this process as far as how do we determine what do we need to do to fix any current issues. So I'm going to kind of cue this up and hand it over to, then does that match what we're hearing from people's experience along the corridor? And then JP is going to step through more, what did we do with that information? What are we looking to do to provide some solutions? So one of the key elements we really have been tasked with is how do we tee up this corridor for better integration of land use and the transportation network. So not just our existing land uses, but the future land uses. So the photo on the right there is an example of what was previously proposed for the Asheville Mall redevelopment. And the issue is that we have to, one, be able to accommodate those future developments, but also get ahead of that. If we need to fix the transportation network, you don't want to be putting a road or widening a road into a building that was just built last year. So it's preparing for those partnerships and ensuring that the system is safe and efficient. And so a lot of these next slides really focus on that merge between safety and efficiency. So this slide, what we did is took a look at the safety along the corridor, and this one's really telling. If you look at the number of crashes that occurred in the various segments, starting at the left near the tunnel, from the tunnel to Chuns Cove Road, there were 84 over a 5-year period. And then going to the left, you'll see the different segments and how many crashes that were reported. And that involves a vehicle being towed from the scene. And it gets reported through the police files. So Tunnel Road, when you look at the entire corridor from the tunnel to South Tunnel, had an average crash rate, and this is how we look at things in our industry, of 1342 crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So it's a calculation we do based on the amount of traffic that's out there and how many crashes. The statewide average for a roadway like this, that's 4 more lanes of traffic with a center turn lane, is 313. So it tells you we have an issue here. This is over 4 times greater than what you would tend to see if you look at statewide averages for a corridor like this. And so in the next slide, what we do is look a little bit more about what is the source of that. And these charts you can dive into more after the conversation. They're there for the data wonks, that really want to dive into it. But we took the top 5 crashes that are occurring in each of those segments to get an idea. Is it a roadway design function? Is there something we can do to fix it? And you'll see that a lot of these crashes are rear end crashes that happen during congested conditions when there's a lot of driveways or people are stopping at a signal. There's side swipes, same direction. So when you have merging or 2 lanes of travel and people are speeding and they're changing lanes last minute, you get a lot of those. That's the yellow. And you can see down at White Pine and South Tunnel where we don't have a turn lane and there's a lot of merging. That's the primary crash type. So this really gives us an idea of what we need to fix and fuels into these next slides. One of the things we started looking at, and I think it's obvious to most folks if you've driven this corridor, is the number of access points along this corridor. What I did here is just took one driveway and showed you how many conflicts you could potentially have for a vehicle turning right or turning left out of that driveway, turning left in and left out. And there you have, I think it was 13 conflict points if you include pedestrians. This does not include cyclists. So if we had bike lanes, that would even be more. So if you take that 13 for one driveway and you add 10 in a short period, you're up to 130 conflicts, not even considering driveway to driveway conflicts. So this next slide really does a good job of showing you what's going on here on Tunnel Road. And this is really likely the source of a lot of the crash rate issues. The light blue or the blue lines here on this map, you can see them, the little signal indications. The blue lines are all the driveways. And over the Tunnel Road, not South Tunnel Road so much, you can see that's much better as far as access spacing. There are 71 driveways on Tunnel Road, and that's a curb cut every 82 feet. So it just gives you an idea of what we're looking at. So it's like we need to fix some of these issues that are contributing to safety and congestion. So that's the safety and access piece like broadly. And then there's also, Yolanda kind of queued this up. This is a high transit corridor. There's a lot of low wage jobs, shopping, and that has resulted in this corridor being one of the most used corridors for transit in the city. And so these pie charts show the weekday and weekend boarding and alighting. So your bus ridership, and you can see starting at the tunnel on the left near the Ingalls, that's a really heavily used stop. And then just kind of going through Tunnel Road has some of the higher use stops. And if you look at South Tunnel, that's still pretty active as well. And in the backdrop there, you can see all the different colors of lines, all the different bus lines that run through here. So it's really a heavy corridor for that. And so some of the things we need to look at is how do we improve access for all, not just those that have a vehicle. And some of that will involve fixing sidewalk gaps, improving bus stop amenities, improving crossings so people can get to the bus. And so that I'm going to go into on this next slide. So that kind of fuels the whole bicycle and pedestrian element. And is that safe? So are people able to get to transit safely? And this image is really interesting. All the blue dots, starting on the left again, Tunnel Road, you can see it goes down South Tunnel all the way down to Swannanoa River Road. All the blue dots are pedestrian crashes. And this is this is a long period. This is 13 years. So, we could even narrow into the last 5 years and see what some of the trends are. But the red dots are fatalities. So there are a few fatalities along the corridor. And then the diamond shape crashes are the bicycle crashes. So we do see, this is pretty high frequency. We look at these types of maps a lot, and this corridor, it clearly has an issue. And so that's one of our goals, is to take that issue and turn it into some recommendations. So this photo just gives you an idea of where we're going to focus on the gaps. On the left, you can see us on our field visit down by the South Tunnel Road intersection, and there's no sidewalk there. The top right, you can see folks crossing the road mid-block. And then in the middle, you can see one of the heavier used bus stops right in front of the Days Inn. You can see folks sitting under the trees there, and you can see the worn paths. You know, that location you're not able to see very well for approaching traffic, and it's a heavily used stop, and there's no control crossing. There's no signal or stop sign that allows people to cross and stops traffic. In the bottom photo, you can see that the bottom right, that location was improved with the transit stop, but there's still no real efficient crossing for folks that want to get off the bus there and then go to uses on the other side of the corridor. And so this next slide shows why that's important. If you can go back one, Yolanda, it was regarding the crossings. So you can see in that photo in the top right, yeah, the crossings photo, next one. So I'll talk about it briefly until she gets there. It's the next slide, Yolanda. So you can see the photo there on the top right. There's 3 folks just jetting across the road there over from the Fairfield Inn over to where the Waffle House is. And you think, well, why can't they just use the signal? You can see the signal in the picture. And so if someone starts at that Fairfield Inn and wants to walk to the Waffle House, and that's 1,300 feet of extra walking, that at a normal walking pace, that could be 6 to 7 minutes. And you add sitting at the signal waiting for it to turn green for you. It could be a 10-minute diversion when all you want to do is walk across the street. And so if we don't get those crossings frequent enough, you're going to be encouraging people to cross illegally. And so that is really something we look at when we're trying to improve pedestrian safety. And so with the next slide,
There's a little lag, Christy. I'm sorry.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you. I know these are always tricky. The last thing we're really looking at in developing the solutions, and you'll see how this all plays together, is, you know, the lack of bicycle facilities. When you look at that network map that Yolanda showed earlier, this corridor is a primary route for transportation, and it is a gap for cyclists. And so there's just really no way to get through town on this area that's flat and safe and kind of efficient. So there are limited alternative routes. With the traffic volumes and speed, that can be really an issue of safety. It can include it can encourage sidewalk riding. And you see that in this photo, a gentleman on the sidewalk riding his bike, and it can discourage cycling. And this close to downtown, we really want to help counter that and create a walkable, bikeable vision. Well, there is a walkable, bikeable vision for this corridor, and we need to develop a system to support that vision. So from there, Christy's going to talk a bit about, does that align with what we're hearing from you all? And I'll turn it over to her.
Great, thanks, Christy. Yeah, so I'll cover the engagement process. And before I go through the slides, I just want to, we've had a couple of comments pop up in the chat box about Homeward Bound's acquisition of the Days Inn. We're well aware of that and have had multiple conversations with the Homeward Bound folks, have multiple conversations with the city, and trying to have that area be one of the catalyst project areas, just because we know that it's a dangerous crossing. It's across the street from Asheville Terrace, and the crossing there is, we're introducing a lot more pedestrians to that area. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So we got community input from a variety of methods. We had an online map, and what you see here are just some of the main components that people shared with us on the mapping platform, and they very much reflect the conditions that Christy shared in the previous slides, that are pedestrian connections, need to do access management. People shared ideas like a roundabout or a shared use path. Lots about access management. Next slide. And then a lot of our time we spent engaging stakeholders and focus groups and looking at the list of folks who are on the call tonight. Many of you participated in those. So we had stakeholders with hotel owners and tourism providers, affordable housing advocates, and developers. We had business owners engaged, real estate developers and property owners, folks with a multimodal interest, and partner agencies, which I'll talk more about in a minute, neighborhood representatives, and some interviews with folks who are working with senior citizens. And the main things we heard from those folks also reflect some of the big things that we've heard and that Christy shared, same themes over and over again. And from the key planning agencies that we interviewed, being City of Asheville Planning and Urban Design, Department of Planning and Urban Design, NCDOT and City Transportation, and folks who are involved with Asheville's transit system, that from the city planning perspective, the vision for the corridor is that land use changes along this corridor can add value and support reinvestment along the corridor, particularly because it's a transit corridor. It's a prime place for affordable housing development, access to jobs and things like that. From DOT and city transportation, a lot of discussion around this of safety along the corridor, some of the challenges to deal with access management, all those driveways that Christy was mentioning, and particularly around the South Tunnel Road and solutions around South Tunnel Road and 70 going east. Is that intersection is super tricky. We've all been on it. We all probably don't love it. But the reason that it's designed the way it is to prevent traffic from backing up on I-240. And that's one of DOT's primary concerns. They just feel like that's a safety concern from their standpoint. And what the main thing we heard from Asheville Transit is that this is a priority corridor for them, and that pedestrian safety crossing to and from the bus stops is a concern. So those bus drivers are seeing the folks dart across the road. Okay, next slide. So summing all those up, the big themes of what we heard, that there's a lot of potential along the corridor to make it a better neighborhood. And that can be from preserving views, adding green space, being good neighbors, reducing negative influences around safety and security, strong potential for redevelopment. I think everybody across the board saw that. No question that pedestrian safety is paramount to making this corridor feel like a better neighborhood. And lots of folks identified that Tunnel Road is a really great place for affordable housing. Again, for some of those, like they think back to those job numbers that Yolanda shared with us early on, lots of jobs that are not paying a living wage. So there needs to be some type of job and housing connection, and this is a great place for that. And also a lot of conversation about this being a gateway to downtown. We've heard a lot of that from hotel owners who shared with us that it's a little cheaper to stay on this side of the tunnel than it is compared to downtown. So people stay on this side of the tunnel, but everybody who stays in those hotels, they end up driving into downtown, putting more pressure on the downtown network because they don't have a good, safe way to walk. If you've walked or ridden your bike through the tunnel, you know it's not a very pleasant experience. And if you're not familiar with the area and aren't comfortable doing that, you just don't do it and you end up driving. And then, so now I'm going to hand it back over to Christy, or is it JP now? JP.
Great, thank you, Christy. And so with this, we've kind of talked about where Tunnel Road is today, and a little bit of some of that analysis, along with some of the input that we've gotten and how we've kind of tweaked that into our transportation recommendations that we're presenting tonight. The one thing I want to touch on is the city has, through the Living Asheville comprehensive master plan, developed a vision for this place, for this corridor, that involves creating urban centers around 2 locations near the Innsbrook Mall and the Asheville Mall. And what you see up on the screen is a rendering of kind of what that vision might look like. So you can see the sort of network of streets, the buildings that are fronting the street. You've got parking center into those blocks. And so the way those kind of all correlate and work together, that is a very different physical scenario than what we see out there today. And so part of our recommendations are beginning to say, well, how do we begin to align those? How do we begin to align some of our solutions with some of these network solutions? And so as we do that, I want to kind of take you through a little bit of the geography and the topography of the area. Obviously, most of you are familiar with the mountain ranges, the Piney Mountain and Beaucatcher Mountain on each side. Yolanda, if you can advance the slide. And, you know, so sort of the Tunnel Road sits in between these 2 mountains and is kind of forms the foothills and the valley between these two mountains, as well as kind of draining downwards towards the, and I apologize if I mess this up, but the Swannanoa River. And so you can kind of see that Tunnel Road sits as this sort of low spot in this valley and foothills, and also the way that I-240 kind of wraps around, parallels it going into downtown and creates, you know, a bit of a barrier. And so that creates a very kind of unique landform and sort of development footprint for what we have. Next slide. And it does create a sort of larger area where we have land on both sides of Tunnel Road, sort of node 1, and then down by the Asheville Mall and some of the developments on the other side of South Tunnel Road, node 2. And then there's this really sort of skinny spot where the topography and the interstate and some of the grading and existing residential neighborhoods create sort of a very thin spot, which I'm sort of calling the connector. And we can see that kind of on the ground. This is in the northern portion adjacent to the Innsbruck Mall, and sort of off in the distance there is where Tunnel Road actually becomes a tunnel and heads towards downtown. And you can begin to see a little bit of the slight grading incline that's coming in on the roadway. And to the points made earlier, you can see a couple of pedestrians there walking on no sidewalks on that side of the road. Next slide. Coming into the connector, or sort of that long neck piece, you can see how, again, there are development behind the trees on the right side. So that's a very steep kind of decline. And then it hits to a couple of those commercial properties. And those properties, that is the depth of those properties to the tree line from the roadway. And a similar thing is happening on the other side as it starts to slope up towards Beaucatcher Mountain. And again, here we do have sidewalks on both sides, but some of the topography issues have kind of created a situation where walls have to be built in order for the roadway to come through. And it ends up getting some really tight pinch points for trying to do anything on the street as well. As we come into the turn just before South Tunnel Road, you see we have a similar condition with the topography as well. And there we don't have a sidewalk because, again, it's hard to create that linear space, vertical or horizontal space that we need for that without creating a lot of walls. And the other thing that's beginning to happen here is as it's widening out to serve the interstate and the turn to South Tunnel Road, the pedestrian crossings are becoming wider and wider. And so here we have 72 feet to get across the street from each side of the two parcels. And then as we get on to South Tunnel Road, you can really see how the topography issue kind of creates a situation on South Tunnel there, with the sort of switchback staircase coming off of the property there on the left side, as well as some walls. And we still have a really wide pedestrian crossing. And you can see the pedestrian there standing there on the right side. Our folks tell us that she's still standing there right now waiting to cross because it's such a long distance to cross. Next slide. So when we think about how to merge the vision of the sort of urban center kind of land uses, the economic development that will be brought, that will come with that, and so revitalizing this corridor, making it that kind of a good neighbor, we think about what is that structure of streets and blocks. And on the left side of this slide, there's just a sort of outline of downtown Asheville, the streets and blocks that are just on the other side of the mountain. And you'll see that the blue lines represent the streets, and you can see the buildings there kind of compressed together. It's about, the whole square represents about 67 acres, and there are about 30 blocks in that part of downtown, and that equals to about 2.2 acres per block. Now I've broken up Tunnel and South Tunnel roads on the other three slides, and those are all to the same scale and same size. So node 1, the first sort of urban center, has 6 blocks, which is about 11.5 acres per block. The connector areas, about 5 blocks at 13. And then you can see the Asheville Mall there, and that really just has 3 blocks with 22 acres per block. So when we think about that, and you think about the walkability of downtown and the sort of economic development that is associated with that, and you look at these other areas, you see there isn't enough infrastructure to support the kind of development or to create that vision that is referred to in the Living Asheville comprehensive plan. Next slide. So part of our idea for this starts at a very high level for the whole corridor. It looks at beginning to create a network plan over the length of the corridor. And the idea would be that new streets and new connections from Tunnel Road to some new streets would be built over time through both infrastructure investments as well as redevelopment. It's kind of like setting a map out or a pathway for the city to follow as new developments come in. Particular areas can be set aside for this secondary network system. And what we're thinking is that it could be, at least for the upper urban center node and the lower urban center node, a new parallel street that parallels on the west side Tunnel Road. And there's a little section there that shows what that might look like with 2 travel lanes in each direction that could also be sharrows, parking on one side or the other. Maybe it varies. Sometimes it's on one side, sometimes it's on another, depending on how it moves through the topography. And then some balancing between sidewalks and streetscapes where new buildings or new development that's built adjacent to that can have some flexibility with different kinds of site furniture and areas for walking, and effectively kind of create a really nice walkable, bikeable environment. And this section isn't a set section, right? It's saying that these are the kinds of things that we would want to see on this parallel road network, and that over time, as it get built, it would have these kind of different aspects and pieces in there. The other piece of this is that some of the way the roadway has kind of been planned is it actually works through areas that are existing drive aisles and parking lots. So for instance, in front of the Innsbruck Mall, the area that we're showing where part of the street would go, or in front of the Asheville Mall, those are actually drive aisles today, and they're being used as vehicular connections, but they have the opportunity to be improved with things like sidewalks and streets and street trees and other elements that actually begin to make it an overall balanced network and a balanced place, and begins to get to a block structure and a street structure that is more similar to what is laid out in the vision from the Living Asheville. So with that, we're going to talk a bit about each area and focus in a little bit more on some of the specific solutions. And I'll hand it over to Christy Stout for that.
Thanks, JP. And there's a lot to digest here. So we're going to go through it, and then we're going to have a little Q&A, because as we get into these solutions, the images provide a lot of information. And there's, like I said, there's just a lot to digest. So kind of taking over from where JP landed, the first part of what we need to do to really fix the things we talked about earlier, it's providing land access, safe and efficient access for all, addressing the pedestrian and bicycle safety, providing transit, and getting ahead of the land use changes, is that grid network, right? And so the blue you see here, this is up at the tunnels on the top left of this image. And then you can see it, this section goes down to Chun's Cove and then down to the 240 ramps there. The blue network really sets into place alternative access and transportation connectivity as it builds out, which means that Tunnel Road doesn't have to do it all. So now we can start doing things like cleaning up access points, making them safer, providing better turning locations, and take some of that pressure off of Tunnel Road itself to provide access to every business and every driveway. And then also one of the things that's going to queue up some of the key transportation solutions for tunnel is that each individual intersection that's there now, that's signalized, has some efficiency issues that we, looking at it, if you can get these intersections better aligned and get the signal operating better, you can free up some of that traffic capacity so that we can actually do some things with the travel lanes. So I'll just explain this once. It's going to apply a lot through the corridor, but when you have 2 legs of an intersection that don't align, you have to give them each their own signal phase, which takes a lot of time off of the other cross streets. And so you end up sitting there a lot longer. And so if you can get them aligned so they go during the same signal phase, all of a sudden the through movements on Tunnel Road get to flow more time, and it frees up a lot of capacity. And actually, Yolanda, if you can go back to that last slide, So there's some intersection improvements we're going to be doing. Those are they're marked by that diamond there. And then also we're going to be looking at improved pedestrian crossings. And you can see in that image, the red crossings at the intersections are where they're missing. And so to really help people be able to cross and move across the corridor, we're going to be looking at improving the frequency, increasing the frequency, and then the access improvements and the bike ped facilities. So if you go to the cross section on the next slide, it kind of shows how this boils down. And this goes back to what JP was saying, is that the corridor is really constrained. And so we started looking at, well, can you widen the corridor to provide better bike facilities, better pedestrian facilities? You know, what can we do here? And it's so constrained in so many locations that would be a really, really challenging thing. And some of those parcels are so narrow that it would basically wipe out many of the businesses along the corridor. So what we found is if we improve the efficiencies at the signals that are there, we could actually take away one lane of travel. And when you widen that, you basically would move the curb out, and then you would have room to provide like a side path, right? That would be the south side of the road. So it would accommodate bikes and pedestrians separate from traffic where it's safer. And then also, and that's this, this middle cross section you can see on this screen that shows the bike path on the side. It really a pedestrian path too. And then what changes in the road is we also provide a center turn lane. So those of you that are familiar with Charlotte Street, it would be similar to that, where instead of having 2 lanes of each direction, where everybody's turning out of the through lanes and then you slam on your brakes last minute, have to change lanes, you would have a lane dedicated to slow down, wait till you have a gap and make your left turn. So this kind of just calms traffic, makes it a little safer. And again, it's dependent on those intersection improvements. And then the last cross section at the bottom shows what would happen long-term as the development piece comes in. And you can see the building fronts there, wider sidewalks, dining, like as land use changes, you really get to that vision that the city has. So really what we're doing is trying to get ahead, fix those things along the corridor that we can to really tee up that long-term vision. And this will take a long time. And so when you get into these other sections, oh, sorry, I had one more note. We wanted to talk about the Tunnel Road, Chuns Cove intersection. And when Yolanda switches aside, you'll see there's a roundabout option. We looked at that as well, because that's one of those things that can really calm traffic, slow speeds, and facilitate access management. So if you make a right turn out of a business instead of a left, you can go down through the traffic circle and continue as if you had made a left turn. So there's things like that that could be looked at. And we also looked at just realigning that intersection. So some of these are things that are going to have to be vetted a little further. And you're going to see this repetition through a lot of these slides and similar recommendations. And if you go down to the next section, this is from the I-240 ramps at the top down to it's actually, the 240 ramps down to Beaucatcher Road. You can see we increased the crossing frequency where the red marks are, those would be improved crossings. And then there's that parallel network that would be running on the west side, and there's several intersection improvements along that corridor. And one of the key intersections that needs to be corrected there, and then again, I think Yolanda, yeah, right there, is the Kenilworth Road intersection comes at an awkward angle that's hard for pedestrians, and it leads to signal inefficiencies. So that's one that would be looking at. And then you can see that Beaucatcher Road, we show that extended. So we're improving kind of that transportation network through these solutions. And then on the next slide, you'll see that's a very similar cross section. And so then we get down to the White Pine area and in front of Bucknell Road. And one of the things here you're going to see is a little more creative, because what we start getting into is this transition to the highway interchange ramps, where the road really widens out. And so to do this cross section of 3 lanes, you really have to start thinking about, like, how do we do that transition? And so with this, if you've ever done this, you come from the mall and you make a left turn onto Tunnel Road to get up to the 240 ramps. There's 2 left turn lanes, and you could be in either one. And once you make that turn, you have to merge, and there's all kinds of lane shifting. And so to do all that between the South Tunnel intersection signal and the White Pine signal is very short. And we think that's contributing to a lot of the crashes there that are high. And so if we could extend that distance, give people more time to calmly make their lane change, do some tapers, we would move that intersection up to Buckstone Place where, yeah, Yolanda was hovering the cursor there. So that would allow us to do a little bit more to clean up that area, make it safer, improve the traffic flow, and improve access to the White Pine the neighborhoods that enter Tunnel Road from White Pine. So it really serves a lot of benefits to do that and helps kind of tee up that reducing one lane on the road. One other point I just want to highlight on that one before we move on is that you'll see the little circle to the left is north of White Pine. It's a traffic circle. And so what we're thinking there is that to realign White Pine, there's a large parcel there. If we could realign White Pine over to Buckstone Place, separate those signals a little more, then we have a crossing at some of those high use bus stops. So that would actually really tee up some safety for pedestrians and potentially facilitate some catalyst sites that could be maybe affordable housing or some public and private partnership type sites. And so we kind of see that corner as maybe one of the catalyst projects that should take off first if something happens of the study. And so then we get down to the South Tunnel Road intersection. And that's really the challenge for pedestrians and bikes. And we need to maintain vehicle capacity. We don't want to make traffic back up onto 240. DOT just spent a lot of time making that flow better and improving traffic. So we don't want to sacrifice that. So we did look at a roundabout option that was thrown out a lot. That is a challenge from a capacity standpoint and for pedestrians. So we also looked at this alignment here, and this is just a preferred sketch. It's really high level. But if you take a look at the image on the right there, you'll see the green space, and that's all mostly pavement right now. And so what we're talking about is not necessarily making vehicles wait longer, but just making it tighter so that pedestrians don't have to be exposed to traffic so long when they're crossing. So this particular solution that we had loses one lane of travel. It tees up that potential road diet we're calling, or lane reduction further up the corridor where it gets more narrow. And it improves pedestrian crossings. So it really tees up a lot and allows for, you'll see the gray in that green area, that signifies a trail, right? And so if you're coming from downtown and you want to get to East Asheville, right now that's very difficult. So this would now have a path that would go from along the entire corridor, cross this intersection, and then have access to the 240 interchange where there's already sidewalks and safer pedestrian crossings at the signals. So it really ties into that well, maintains capacity. It's tied in with the White Pine Road realignment. So it provides better access to neighborhoods, helps with the merging. And it's just really a safety focus on this one. And so this last one is that same section, right? So it's really the same cross section, nothing really new here. And so then we move on to, we just want to give a little time to South Tunnel Road. So in the next slide, you'll see the image on the right shows a little bit of what we're thinking about, ideas on how future development could complete a grid network and help provide, again, take it so Tunnel Road or South Tunnel Road doesn't have to do all the work, right? And so you have these other little network connectors that allow for access to business and take that pressure off. This section of the corridor is a lot better from an access management standpoint, but it also has issues where those side streets don't line up right. And so they're still having that signal efficiency that we're seeing on other parts of the corridor that I know, on the holidays, this corridor is tough. And a lot of it comes down to if we could get these intersections realigned, get the signals operating better, we're gonna see a huge improvement for everyone. And you'll see the green line through that image shows how we would do with a path there. We're looking at alignment that would potentially go behind the Whole Foods on the north side and then jog out to South Tunnel where there's no sidewalk as you get close to Swannanoa River Road. And so that would complete the pedestrian network there that's missing, provide that full trail connection. And as many of you know, there's a planned greenway along Swannanoa River Road and it would connect into that. So it really does a nice rounding out of the network. And I think that's the main thing. There's a lot of details here. This section would not be a lane reduction. This would really, I think some of the benefits would come from that grid network, improving crossings, and then maybe some greening, streetscaping, things to make it a little more inviting. So you'll see the landscape median in the middle section here that's shown on the right. And on the bottom, future land use will look a little more to what we're seeing up near the Whole Foods sites where the buildings are on the side of the road and there's seating areas and it just creates more of an urban environment. And so I think that was the last slide. And what we want to talk about now is like, how does this kind of play out? This is a lot of big goals. Are we going to do this tomorrow? And Christy's going to cover how this kind of plays out.
So as Christy mentioned, this is it's not good. Things aren't going to happen tomorrow, although we have recommendations of what could happen tomorrow to improve some things. But the way to look at this is that it is a long-term vision. Tristan and John with the MPO, when they put projects into that document that they mentioned called the STIP, that is, those projects usually take 10, 15 years from kind of initial concept to planning on the ground. So we'll look for the smaller wins, more immediate. There are some development projects along the corridor that the city can start working with developers to implement some things as those newer projects come about. And just to talk about the bigger, broader process, if we think about, where'd my slide go? Thanks. If we think about the long-term vision and what happens right now, most of this is in the master planning or visioning stage. The whole corridor would get broken up into smaller projects to implement along the corridor. Those would go through NCDOT's STIP process, because that's one important thing that I think we glossed over a little bit. This is an NCDOT road. It is not a city managed road. So the city can't make any decisions and say, tomorrow we're going to do A, B, C, and D. It has to be in partnership with DOT and the property owners. So it goes to STIP, then it would go to construction and right-of-way acquisition. Somewhere in there, you figure out the funding options for it, and then it begins that permitting, construction documents, and bidding, and then the actual construction process. Also, what's important to note along that is that community engagement happens along that whole process. So if we were looking at some of those really big projects, such as maybe the Tunnel Road, South Tunnel Road intersection, that sketch that Christy showed, that's a pretty big undertaking and would take a number of years to get from the idea to get to the negotiation to actually get to construction. And Yolanda, you went backward.
This is the one on the DOT road phasing. You're good.
Yeah. Okay. And so, but there are a couple of questions that I think are good to maybe just hit some points now. One person, I think it was Rick, asked, can the city close driveways? We've talked a lot about access management, and that concept being, better property access from one property to another, or if there's a property that has 3 driveway access points, which there are some of those along the corridor, can you close at least one of those? So no, the city doesn't have the authority to come through and do that all at once. And that's a good reason I'm bringing up in context of this is, as properties are redeveloped and they come to the city as a site plan, that's when some of that negotiation can happen. That's when some of those driveways can be tightened up. They might become right in, right out, or whatever makes it work for the corridor. That's when the opportunity to reconfigure those access points generally happens. Sometimes they also happen in a roadway project. Going back to the Charlotte Street example, some of the negotiation there to reduce access points was to talk with property owners and narrow down some of their access points. So there's lots of negotiation in the project development process that can happen to get to that access management goal. So go ahead. And now I think we're ready to open it up for question and answers. And we have several.
We may want to touch base on the slide too, not this one, but the next one, Yolanda, because it talks about how these alignments could change and kind of how the development part gets built out. And we just wanted to highlight, we know there's folks on this call that are stakeholders and have issues with this. You might be seeing a line that goes right through your property, right? And we just wanted to really highlight that these new connections show the concept, and that, the city knows that site development needs to take in context, where are the utilities, where are the grades, is this constructible, is it profitable? And so we do recognize that these alignments can change to fit specific site developments, but it's really there to get the conversation started, make sure we don't miss the opportunity to build these connections, and to really tee up some public-private partnerships, such as the White Pine location. So now that we know, hey, we need to realign this road, and this example on the right is a great example. You'll see Kenilworth Road is realigned coming into Tunnel, and we show a new connector there, which, you know, hits the Mountaineer Inn, right? And so they would need to go talk to them and say, hey, could we create a catalyst site here where we do some parks, or maybe, you know, do a public-private partnership with affordable housing? And so, you know, we're kind of teeing that up, but not saying it has to look exactly like this. So that we just wanted to make sure that was highlighted before we get into Q&A. And so, yeah, Christy, go for it with the Q&A.
Sure. The first question that came up is a question from Barbara about stormwater and concerns about Kenilworth Lake, and what are the plans to deal more effectively with stormwater runoff. So I'll say one thing about that, and then I'm going to ask city staff to chime in. So I think Dan or Stacy, I'm not sure who else is there. But looking at roadway projects can be an opportunity to deal with stormwater runoff, depending on the scope and scale of the project. So when things get reconfigured, that's an opportunity to put in new storm drains, to just and better maybe change the angle of the road to better manage runoff in general. But Dan, do you want to jump in, Dan or Stacy, either one, to talk about kind of the city's perspective on stormwater and development?
I can jump in briefly, okay. But I might defer to Stacy because in the transportation planning arena, I know a little bit about stormwater, but not as much as how it relates to development. So,
well, I could actually, what it sounds like from the question that I saw is that it's more of an enforcement issue with concerns about Kenilworth and Kenilworth Lake. So I can put in the chat the hotline to contact our development services department. And that might be a place to start as far as addressing those specific concerns with current development.
Next question is, I think I addressed it a little bit, but if anybody wants to chime in, either Christy or JP, does the city actually have the right to close driveways that come directly onto Tunnel if these secondary streets actually provide access to the businesses?
Yeah, I mean, as far as just closing access, that's not something that transportation planners, and usually that doesn't happen. Usually it's, you know, even if you do full access management and you limit someone's site severely, and it went to, like, say, a DOT project that went through condemnation, there's usually a purchase process where it's the Uniform Right-of-Way Act, where they're reimbursed for their loss of value for their site. So it kind of fits into that whole right-of-way negotiation process. So it never is just like, yeah, we just come in and take it. Like, that's not how transportation projects come to fruition.
Yeah, I would add that.
And
I would just quickly add that a lot of what we're talking about with those would be through redevelopment. So if there is a parallel road set up on the backside of the property and there's a way to access it from a connector, then through redevelopment, those access to Tunnel Road may not be rebuilt in the redevelopment piece of it. However, if that's the only access point, then that will still be an access point on Tunnel Road, as Christy pointed out.
yeah, and then next question, I think we answered, but just to confirm, would this include better intersection alignment at Kenilworth Road and Kenilworth Knolls and Tunnel Road? And yeah, that would be ideal to have better alignment through there.
Yeah, we're showing that.
And yeah, and can you explain how reducing lanes does not cause backups even with the changes to signal timing?
Yeah,
Christy, you want to take that one?
I'll try. Yeah, so for the majority of the corridor, what you get when you have 2 travel lanes in each direction and no way to pull out of traffic to make your turn. So say you're a left turning vehicle, you're coming up to the Days Inn, and you're like stopping on a blind hill and someone coming behind you slamming the brakes on. That's like an efficiency issue, and it causes a lot of crashes, creates a lot of lane weaving. And so in between traffic signals, you'll often find that when you take that lane away and you make it flow more smoothly, fewer lane shifting. The capacity is the same. It's just that you don't have all the weaving and the safety issues, right? The issue becomes the signals. So as long as you have room, like say you never had to stop on that road, there was never a signal, you never had to slow down, those lanes can typically carry a certain volume per day. And so you'll see that. But then when you get to the signals and make people stop and take turns, that's where you lose a lot of your capacity. So that's where the efficiencies at the signal, when you remove a lane, actually, when you improve the efficiency, you could offset that. The other option is you could provide additional turn lanes at those signals. So we can do things to make sure that we're not making it worse. So we'll be doing some traffic modeling long-term if this project goes forward, and you'd be able to see traffic flowing before and after. I know it's complex, it's hard to understand. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I think Christy, the key piece is that in this instance where it's 4 lanes in opposite direction, 2 lanes in each direction, without that center turn lane, that's where a lot of your inefficiency comes in, and that's where a lot of backups may be happening today. Having a dedicated left turn lane actually will solve a lot of the backups that are happening today. And then as Christy pointed out, those turn lanes are also going to be at the signals, which then allows for an easier turning of vehicles and all that sort of stuff through the signals. So we end up getting more efficiency out of that portion of the corridor with 3 lanes. And there are actually a lot of studies that show 3-lane sections are more efficient and help with traffic flow than 4-lane sections.
And let me be clear too, is that it doesn't mean that we're not going to add turn lanes at the signals, and the signals are what control the capacity of the corridor. So we can do things to make them flow better. And we're also not reducing down to 3 lanes through the entire corridor. At South Tunnel Road, it's still 5, 6, 7 lanes like it is today. So it's really only in the areas that we're so constrained, we can't widen. It's the only way to get a safe corridor, and we can fix the signals. So it is something that will have to be carefully looked at to make sure we're not making this so challenging for folks to get home or get to these businesses.
Okay, so next one, how does the Greenway tie into Tunnel Road heading east? You want to talk through that sidewalk?
Yeah, so one of the recommendations we have thrown out and been talking about putting in the final report is to widen that sidewalk over the interchange into a trail. So that would get you, the sidewalk's there, and there's pedestrian crossings at those signals on the south side of the interchange. And so that's part of the other focus of why we're not doing like bike lanes or focusing a ton on a path on the north side of Tunnel. It's because we need to get across that interchange. And so to get there, they have to be on the south side of Tunnel Road.
And then just one side note to that we're also working on the city's Greenway and pedestrian plan update. And that's one of the conundrums, that kind of east part of Asheville is one of the conundrums we're trying to figure out. There's some tough challenges through there, but you can look forward to that, and the city will be hosting some meetings later in the spring, early summer about that. Would White Pine Drive still be the only way into Kenilworth Forest? Are you proposing another road entry into Kenilworth Forest? JP, you want to take that one?
Sure, I can sort of start it off. So I think as Christy had mentioned, as we were closing the sort of presentation piece, we are showing parallel network and connectors from Tunnel and South Tunnel Road. So right now we're showing a realignment of White Pine Drive through that roundabout or through the sort of circular roundabout to Buckstone Place, and that would remain the sort of northern entry into the neighborhood. We are showing a roadway on the south side of the Asheville Mall that would go along the Ridgeway and connect on the backside to White Pine Drive. That roadway would be assumed to be part of any kind of future redevelopment that might happen at the Asheville Mall. So that area back there is, I think, a parking deck and some other surface parking area. And right now there's no access to the neighborhood, although I saw in the comments that some of the fencing there has been torn down in the past. So we're showing that connection, but we envision that as a longer term solution that would come with other redevelopment, so that the area or the nature of that portion of the Asheville Mall would be different than what's there today. So those are sort of the north and south access points into the neighborhood. And then Christy, do you want to talk a little bit more, Christy Stout, on the two access points on White Pine?
Yeah, and I think it would be probably easiest if we jump to the slide that has the White Pine relocation. I think it's slide, it's about 5 or 6 back, Yolanda, it's slide 56. But just for folk, yeah, that's it right there. So if you see the traffic circle there right above White Pine that we're showing, you'll see there's a leg of that goes off to the apartments that are there. There's a leg that goes into the Asheville Mall. There's 2 that go into the mall, 1 that goes to Buckstone Place. And so, you know, it's not going to be necessarily a new road that connects other than White Pine, but there's many ways to get from White Pine down to Tunnel and South Tunnel. So it'll improve that access to the out of the neighborhood. I think it is very challenging topographically to do anything that would connect like from the mall area up to the hill there. It would take homes and it's super steep. So really what we're saying is, you know, as you're coming down White Pine to Tunnel, we're dispersing traffic through multiple, you know, points. So it's kind of, yes, we're improving access to White Pine, but it's not necessarily a new road in from a different location. So I hope that makes some sense.
And then while we're on White Pine, and I want to hit a couple of other areas, there's a second question of what would be the benefit of that southern connector south of the mall.
If you can go up to the blow up that shows the Asheville Mall site, yeah, right here. So the benefit of this connector is more in a future setting where the area that you sort of see is in the gray and white. That is actually parking garage, I think, for the mall. Frankly, that is a lot of land area. And if the Asheville Mall were to redevelop, or a portion of it were to redevelop into something different, mixed use development, or potentially residential housing, or other things that may be economically viable in that area, that connection for White Pine would serve as an anchor for a lot of that development to come down to and then exit back towards South Tunnel Road. So again, we were showing it because of the ridge line that's there and the height of the neighborhood. As you get into onto the full White Pine Drive, there's sort of that flat area where the parking and some of the buildings are. And so if that were to redevelop, it would need some additional infrastructure. And we think following the current access road that goes back behind there to the parking lot and connecting it the rest of the way would give a lot of options for whatever redevelopment may occur there.
Okay, so clarification question on the maps. I think, could you please re-clarify how the 2 different blue dotted lines will be utilized, vehicles, pedestrians?
Sure. So the thicker blue dotted line that parallels South Tunnel Road here and Tunnel Road in the other sections is what we're calling the parallel road, which earlier in the presentation, I showed a typical section that would show it as like a 2-lane roadway with parking on either side, landscape and side amenities, sort of a streetscape kind of a roadway. And the idea is that that would be how, yeah, there it is there. And so the idea would be that's the kind of width of street that we're thinking would get built over time and through redevelopment. It also can begin to fit into existing drive aisles, that those can begin to be converted into something that is not just an area for cars to access, but actually have sidewalks and all that kind of stuff. So that's the thinner dash roads that you're seeing are kind of the perpendicular roadways that could be formalized coming from South Tunnel Road and Tunnel Road onto that network, new network parallel street. And those would be similar to some of the roads that are out there today, just added sidewalks or added aspects of walkability and bikeability. And those would begin to form the block structure along Tunnel Road that we talked about.
And then just one point to reiterate, because we're getting a lot of comments, that keep in mind that little chart that I showed is this is the initial starting kind of concept area. And anytime a project gets formalized, whether it be through the city or through the MPO and CDOT process, that there is additional community engagement. So some of these issues with White Pine, there will be future opportunity to talk through some of those issues. This is just a broad plan and not a guarantee that any of it will happen. So I think that wraps us up for questions. If anybody else wants to chime in with questions, or if you want to chime in and say you missed mine. Some folks, some points for us to consider, and we certainly will capture those. And appreciate you sharing them. What else we got?
There's one question I could touch base on the White Pine, adding traffic to that. I just wanted to clarify, JP, you may want to talk to this, but I believe the connection that's shown south of the mall, if it were ever to develop, that goes from White Pine down to South Tunnel. I actually hadn't even seen that on your new map, JP. I think it's more meant to provide additional access for the White Pine residents out. It's not set up topographically and direct enough to be adding traffic where someone would come from the mall, use White Pine and go all the way around to go into the city. So I don't think that that's really the way it's set up.
Yeah, I agree with that. The intention was more of an outlet or for the development that may occur there to have a way to access Tunnel Road. To the point that was made in the chat about the narrowness and the tightness of White Pine, that's just not going to be a feasible route to try to get to Tunnel Road when it's easy to take the new road or that potential new road directly east. So I don't really know that would create any additional traffic on White Pine Road.
And if it's not feasible, Drive, if they find that it's not feasible, it may be that it could be a trail connection. There are questions there. Is would it be one way? Another option would be to do some traffic calming, things like that. It's like they've done on the other side of 240 in those neighborhoods. So there's a whole planning process with feasibility and seeing what that'll look like, Rick. So I think that those are good concerns to hear. Thank you.
I just want to that we are talking about a series of different widths. It would really depend on what the development is trying to do as well. You know, it could be parking on both sides. It could be very, you know, any of these local road connections really need to be worked out through a more detailed planning process and with the development community.
And just a procedure question. For John and Tristan, we'll share the slides, and the presentation recording will be on the French Broad River MPO's website. John, do you mind popping that, John or Tristan, either one, putting that address into the chat box? And then another question, where's the trail plan to connect Swannanoa River Road to the tunnel? So we might need to go back to, well, that map may cover it there. Or
yeah, this map, all these maps have, and you can go back, Corinne, later and look at these. They have the dash green. So the dash green that runs along Tunnel Road on all those would be the side path. So that would be the trail. And then once it gets down to Wood Avenue and Swannanoa River Road, the trail, the Swannanoa River Greenway, is running on the south side of Swannanoa River Road. So it'll be under the Wood Avenue Bridge, and there'll be some connections to get to that.
And Christy, do you want to give an update on where that is? Or I think Lucy's on the call too.
Yeah, if Lucy wants to chime in, but it's really exciting. The city's working forward on construction documents so that could get bid out to build that section of the Greenway. So it's in the near future.
taking that as a no from Lucy. She may have dropped off.
She may be muted too, yeah.
Okay. All right. As far as how we follow what happens next, also French Broad River MPO, the next steps will be posted there. I can't remember whether we have the draft document that kind of goes through all of this in a lot more detail. I can't remember if that's up there, John, or not.
Excuse me, could you repeat that? Sorry, you broke up on my end.
Have we posted the draft document on the website as of yet? So that'll be the next bigger step, I think.
No, that will be the
Okay.
next step to have the draft document posted. But yes, we will be posting a recording of this presentation on the MPO website as well as the presentation itself.
Yeah. Okay. And just again, some of the things we're hearing you on some of the comments that are going through. And Carolyn said, question, please. So you're welcome to type that in.
She had a question earlier about the quarter line being drawn through the established neighborhoods. And I guess I just want to clarify that the blue dash line that we're showing is occurring through primarily, if not exclusively, the commercial properties that are fronting Tunnel Road. And we were careful to keep it out of any of the neighborhoods. There is a darker gray line that you might be seeing, that those are existing roadways that are going through going through the neighborhoods as they do today. Those are existing roadways. But the blue dash line, we tried to keep it from anything's cutting through the neighborhood, I should say, and really connecting to existing streets.
So Carolyn said this was the red line shown on the original information that I saw. So I'm not sure what that refers to. John, can you unmute Carolyn and have her explain that part to us? And while John's unmuting Carolyn, yes, we do not have the dates of when it's going to go to the city. We wanted to have this meeting and kind of understand what we need to tweak and rework afterward. But as soon as we do have that timeline nailed down of the presentations and such, we'll definitely send that out. We've been collecting email addresses as we've gone through this process, advertising through city and county channels. If you were in our stakeholder meetings, we re-emailed folks. So if you want us to specifically get on your list, you're welcome to put your email address in the chat box and we'll add you to that. And Carolyn, do you want to?
This was on the this was on the web. You was doing it at the city of Asheville, and then there was the thing about the corridors happening now, and there was you went to a map, and there was an aerial whatnot, and there was
yeah. I'm sorry, I know what you're talking about now. That was the extent of the study. There was just a line that followed Tunnel Road from the tunnel down to Swannanoa River. I can't pull that up right now, but that was more just kind of saying, here's the extent of the study. And I don't think we have that anywhere in here.
It might be at the very beginning of the presentation.
No, I didn't see it on this program. I saw it on the City of Asheville's website when I pulled up the corridor study.
Yeah, I mean, just to reassure you, we're not showing any new roadways through residential neighborhoods on this, so that hasn't been added. If it was there originally, it was removed. I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who shared your email, thanks. Anything else? If not, we'll wrap up. And the contact information, John is the best person. John, do you want to pop your email address into the chat box also, and I'll put mine in there as well. Okay, so any of the community feedback that you, oops, I just emailed it mine to one person. Give me a second to do that again. Okay. Going once, twice, 3 times. We're done. Thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate it. It's a lot of information to sit through. Again, we'll get this posted. John will handle that. So if it doesn't happen fast enough, go after him. And then as soon as we have time to digest all of this and make adjustments, then we'll start having we'll go through kind of that process that happens when studies are done. I'm not trying to be evasive about that. We're just not sure about how we're going to go about that because we wanted to have this meeting tonight first, and we'll regroup on that. Okay.
Huh?
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all.
Appreciate it.